This is a dual action fuel pump, 1955-56 Buick. It's the fuel side and the vacuum side. I think it's time for a rebuild. One of the first things you're going to do is make a mark somewhere on the casting between the fuel casting and the body, so that you can put it back in the same orientation, where the inlet and outlet are in the same spot. Some people draw a line with a hacksaw across. Doesn't matter. Mark it any way you can. This one's been rebuilt at some point in the past. You can see right there someone stamped a number 5, and right up in here they stamped a number 5. So we'll use that as a reference. On these dual action pumps, to remove everything, it's best to start with the vacuum side and remove the 8 screws. There's no need of marking the orientation, as it'll only go on one way. So let's get going to take these screws off. Be careful with the last screw. You want to hold the casting down. Underneath here there's a pretty hefty spring, as you'll see in a second. There's the 2 valves, the inlet and the outlet valve. These are for the air or vacuum to run the wipers. There's the spring. It's damn near a valve spring. The spring seat. And this pump has been repaired at one time in the past. Some of these are removed by turning it a quarter turn and lifting up. That's because the pull rod is shaped like an arrow, and it just pushes down and turns to lock into the link. Now I get something to wipe my hands, we'll hit pause. Here's a good shot of what happens when your seal goes bad. All this oil. So I go through a lot of paper towels. Grab your screwdriver. This valve here just usually comes out pretty easily if you're using the right screwdriver. We'll take out the seal first. Just hang to one side, knock it out. Be careful doing it that way, as the seat for this seal is right underneath here, and you could catch it. But it's really the only easiest way to get them out of there. The pieces to the valves. We're going to throw them right in the trash, along with all this other stuff. There's a gasket that goes on This valve, no gasket on this valve seat. We're going to flip this over and take care of the fuel side. Mark the location. Like I said before, this one's already been marked. And if I didn't say it, I said it just now. Remove the pulsator cover and the diaphragm. And remove all the 10 screws. Just like the vacuum side, weight on the last screw. Doesn't have that big of a spring on it, but it does tend to push up. Sometimes it gets stuck. Remove all the screws and the thing takes off after it unsticks itself. Diaphragm. This is probably one of the more difficult parts. You want to push the diaphragm down and tip it towards the back. That unhooks it. This little slot goes into a link down inside of here. What you're going to do is push it down and tip it back this way, and it should come right up. If not, keep at it, it'll eventually come up. There's another seal in here. A lot of people will take and pry this right across like this. There's pretty delicate castings in here that you don't want to break. So what I do is I go up from underneath, find the edge of the seal, and knock it out. If you're doing this at home, this is the time where you take a flat file, run it across here. Do the same thing the other side. Run a flat file across here. You want to get rid of all this oil. What I use brake clean. Brake clean will wipe out the oil, and it leaves it nice and dry too. And it takes a lot of this out. No gasket sealer. So, with that being said, you got to remove these two valves. One of them is pretty easy. You can get it right through the top. A couple taps with a hammer and a screwdriver. It knocks it right out. And there's also a gasket in there. This one here, depending on what kind of valve it is. Some of them will just pop right out like that. There was a gasket under there, but it wasn't doing anything. Other valves, what I do is I just do like I did on the body casting and just drive the screwdriver down through the middle of it and pry it. Just pry them out to one side. Pretty simple, crude but simple. It's a good example of that is the vacuum side, because you can't get to the top of it. So we just pop it apart. Catch the edge of it and pop it out. Now both of these are going to have gaskets on the seats. All the little extra pieces. This is when a little screwdriver come in handy to dig out that gasket. More oil to wipe up. And she's ready to be filed flat. Same thing with the fuel side. You want to file this nice and flat. You also want to file this side nice and flat. See how far off it is right now. I don't know if you can see this or not. This center portion is actually higher than the outside. And if we would tighten down this cover, it would hit in the center and you'd end up with a vacuum leak, a fuel leak. This part here wouldn't seal right. You don't want fuel coming out of there. What I do is glass bead everything, so I'm off to the glass beater right now. These are the parts that I'll be using for this pump. 2 diaphragms, pulsator, fuel valves, vacuum valves, the gaskets. And I do new screws on everything. And the 2 seals. Okay, everything's been cleaned up and ready to go. Seeing as how I have access to a 4-inch belt sander, I can clean off this, make this nice and flat. Same thing with the fuel side of it. And if you remember this being nice and high, after a trip to the belt sander, she's flat, no more rocking. And this side's all nice and flat. Same thing with the vacuum side. Time for some assembly. Grab one of the gaskets, drop it in to the seat. This valve goes in with the rivet down. Drive it down. I went in a little easy, so I like to take I have a chisel that I ground the end flat on, and I hit it on either side, dimple the casting, and it holds that valve down. Next step is to put in the seal for the fuel side. And these seals, this side of the retainer is flat, this one's got a groove in it, and the seal right around that edge, and they just fit together. The sealing surface is here and in the center of that. The reason I mention that is because occasionally you'll get a seal that's got a little defect in it on this edge. It doesn't affect anything. Use whatever you have to drive this in. It's about 1 inch. Drive it down till it stops. You use the center punch to dimple the corners of the casting. It keeps the seal from lifting up and causing misery. take your new diaphragm with your spring. Best to put a little oil on the center of the seal, keep it from running dry. Get it lined up in the hole and tip it over. If you look down inside, you'll see the fuel link. That one with the slot in it is the vacuum side. And down in between it is the fuel. You just push it up, hook it on it, and it's all set. Set that aside. Now for the fuel, this one takes two big valves that are 1 inch across diameter. Now if you look down inside, you'll see this hole is narrower than this hole. With that in mind, it kind of gives you an indication as to which way the valve's going to go. And this is going to go down against it, as opposed to this way. Set it in, drive it home, take the other one, drive it home. A little added insurance. We're going to just dimple around the outside, 4 spots. Keep those valves from moving. Flip it over. Pulsator cover the new diaphragm. Just drop it on and snug it up. And that's all set. On to the vacuum side. Put the gaskets in. Again, if you look down inside, you'll notice the casting is a little smaller than it is on this side. What that tells you is this valve goes this way. And the other one goes the other way. One lets the air in, one lets the air out. The vacuum's going to come in here. When the diaphragm comes down this way, when the diaphragm comes down, it creates a vacuum, pulls air in here, and this line runs up to your wiper motor. This one here is air going out. This hose would run to your intake manifold. When the diaphragm comes up against it, it pushes air out, and that is only doing that while the intake manifold vacuum is at 0, like under acceleration, going up a hill, racing your buddy, etc. Time for some assembly. Fuel side first. Find your mark. This happens to be right there. And right here. We line those two up. the two screws in, one opposite each other. Pull the arm up a little bit so it takes some of the pressure off it. You just run these screws down about halfway, and then put the rest of them in. Now this is important. We want to take your adjustable wrench, put it on the arm, pull it till it stops. You can see this, how it's pulling the diaphragm down inside. Keep it in that position and tighten up at least 4 of the screws opposite each other. What you're doing is preloading the diaphragm. If it's not done, you end up with a high pressure, premature failure of the diaphragm. And then tighten up the rest of the screws. A quick test to make sure that everything's seating right. Hold your finger over the inlet. Lift that up on the arm. You'll feel suction while it's up. Put your finger over the outlet and let it go. And you'll feel pressure. The fuel side's done. Off to the vacuum side. Now we're ready for the vacuum side. Take a seal. Tap it down a little bit and make sure that it's sitting right. Drive it home. Dimple the casting. Now there's no gasket that goes in that side. Drop the valve in. Good idea to give it a couple little taps. Make sure it's sitting nice and flat. A spot of oil in the center. Keep it from running dry. Now remember, this has got the key. Start it straight. Put a little pressure on the arm. And you'll go down and you'll feel it hitting the top of that. Turn it. Now it's inside it. And just slowly start trying to turn it back as you're going down with the arm. You can't push it down, you can't pull it up so that you're locked in. Spring seat. Spring. Put one screw opposite the other. Line up this hole and get it cut. Just get it caught a little bit and then catch the back one. Keep an eye out here. Make sure that the diaphragm hasn't pulled inside just from the pressure of the spring pushing down on the diaphragm. A lot of times it'll suck the diaphragm right inside. It's usually on the bigger ones. There's 2 different sizes of vacuum diaphragms. Another way to test it, to see if it's caught, is to put your adjustable on the arm and move the arm up and down. And what you're doing is pushing the diaphragm up and down, and it flattens out diaphragm, which is the position that you want it in on this side. This diaphragm goes in the neutral position, where the fuel side gets pulled down inside. Now that everything is there, set it in a neutral position, snug them down. Tighten them down. You're in the home stretch. Okay, now that they're all in there, do a quick test. You're going to get pressure out to the out and suction on the in. Success. Aside from a gasket, this is ready to go in a car for the rest of its life. Any questions? Give me a buzz. If you find that you got movement in this arm, this way, and you feel that the pin is worn, you can remove it by cutting this washer off and drive the pin straight through. It'll come out the other side. There's a spring down inside of here. You can replace that if you want, if you find that there's a problem with it. This didn't have any kind of movement or anything, so I felt that the pin didn't need to be removed. Now, the customer with this 55-56 Buick elected to send it in and have me rebuild it. If you'd rather do it yourself, one of the first things you're going to have to know is this number right here. It says 4304. This happens to have an M after it, but that's only because this has been rebuilt before. With that number, give us a call, check in our catalogs, and we can assign a kit number to it and send you a kit. If there's no number there, give the application to the car. You might have to take it apart to give some casting numbers that are on underneath in here, and there's casting numbers inside of the body. There's also casting numbers on inside of this vacuum side. We also have some numbers on the arm. With any of those, we should be able to get a kit for you. There you go.